Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Liam Dann, New Zealand Herald Business Editor at Large. This is a podcast where we talk to New Zealanders about money and how it has shaped their lives. We're not going to tell you how to get rich. We're not going to pick the next interest rate move. But we are going to get you thinking about your relationship with money and what it really means to you. Today I'm talking to Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister and one-time band manager, Grant Robertson.
This is true. Hello, Liam.
Hi, Grant. A guest I've had on this show is Matt Heath from Radio Hauraki. Yeah. One of the revelations from his interview was that he used to manage his band.
I did. A band called Kid Eternity. And Matt, he lives the dream, really, doesn't he? He is Kid Eternity. Yeah, down in Dunedin. Not for a very long period of time. I managed a couple of other bands down there as well for a bit longer. But Matt was an enthusiastic guitarist, and I say this when I'm interviewed by him on Hauraki, but he still owes me $200. And that in $93, I haven't inflated that out yet. But
just hold that over him.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I asked him, and try to ask guests who have a bit of a passion for music, is what's your favourite song about money?
Yeah. A lot of the songs about money are a bit pessimistic.
Well, you're famously a Flying Nun fan.
Yeah, and there are some related songs to money there, but they wouldn't be the ones I'd choose. Actually, a song that I would choose that's kind of about money but doesn't talk about money is Man in the Corner Shop by The Jam.
Oh, yeah.
So Paul Weller, who was a big force in English music and went on to form the Style Council. And Man in the Corner Shop is sort of based around three people, a customer in the corner shop who works at a factory, the person who owns the shop, and then the owner of the factory. Right. And they've all got their own pressures and stresses that come from money, and the chorus line is about saying, and God created all men equal, and it's a song it's about class, but it's about money as well, and the fact that money plays a really interesting role in people's lives, and even if you have quite a lot of it, it can also be part of a stress as well. Yeah, well, that was Matt's choice was more money, more problems. Exactly, that's right.
Look, let me jump back, because this is a podcast about your relationship with money. Obviously, you are kind of the guy in charge of the Crown's finances, but not really our money, I suppose. It's a theoretical concept, right?
Yeah, there aren't stocks of cash in the basement of the beehive, if that's what you mean, no.
What were your first memories of having money as a child or holding it? Do you recall?
Yeah, I was part of the generation when we did, school-based savings type programs, and a lot of people remember the post office from our generation. Remember the post office savings bank books. We had a slightly different version of that, which was provided by the local bank, and it was a cardboard thing in the shape of a kiwi, and you slotted in. This is how old I am. 2 cent pieces into it, and eventually you filled them up, and I presume you got something for that. And I have a really strong memory of putting the 2 cent pieces into the little slots with that. So it was, as you are when you're young, what a very small amounts of money suddenly become very interesting when we realise what you can get for them. Yeah.
Do you recall what you would have been saving up to buy in those days?
I can't remember what it was. I do. I probably would have been some kind of new little stock car, toy car, probably. Later on, it was to buy cricket and rugby books, and that was a big thing in my family, was that if you wanted to do those things, you did have to save the money up. My mother had a thing when again, showing my age, when each of us turned 12, she decided that the money that she got as the family benefit, which was a universal benefit for everyone then, we would then take charge of that. We would be given that, but that was the money for our clothes. Yeah. And apart from undies and socks, every other thing we bought, we had to pay for using that money.
I recall that. It was like $14 a week or something like that.
It was almost exactly that. And we saved it up. And I remember going to my first high school dance in third form, and I'd saved up the money to buy what I considered to be a pretty natty jersey. And I remember walking into the third form dance and realising that fashion was never going to be my strength. But I think that was quite a good lesson from Mum. I think, that we kind of were given that money to look after, but we had a responsibility to use it for the clothes we were going to wear.
Yeah. Did you have a part-time job? That sort of thing?
I did, yes. A couple of them. But my main one was working in a supermarket. So from, I think, the end of my fifth form year, right through till second or third year at university, I worked in the fruit and veggie section of South City New World in Dunedin. And I mean, that was fantastic to have pocket money like that. Latterly, towards the end, it was a bit more serious for me because I needed that money to get by. But certainly at high school, it was good. And I did the Thursday nights and the Fridays, and then they brought in Sunday shopping, and I was managing the fruit and veggie section.
Well, did they try and tempt you into a career in
fruit and veggie? No, look, it's an honourable industry, but no.
So how would you describe? Did you have a sort of a class consciousness? Did you feel like you grew up working class, middle class?
Interesting, eh? Like we were, as a family, we were comfortable but not rich. And I would put that in a New Zealand context to being middle class. My father worked initially in banking and then as an accountant in a law firm, and so we were comfortable. My mother was at home and then she became a teacher, and so there was money to be able to go out to a restaurant for a birthday. There were holidays, although not really overseas, and so we were comfortable without being wealthy, but we were also a Presbyterian family, and so the idea of being kind of careful with money was important. I was conscious in the community I grew up in, which was South Dunedin, that there were a lot of people who didn't have money, and that was really clear to me at school, and then as latterly as we all grew up and off to university and things. I got to go to university, but a number of people I knew didn't. And so I was very aware that South Dunedin community, as a middle class family, we were probably wealthy within that community. Obviously, things went really astray for my family because my father ended up being arrested for theft as a servant. And so that changed things a lot in terms of the wealth that we felt we had around us.
So was that a shock to you? I would imagine it would be.
A massive shock. So
he's an accountant,
He's an accountant in a law firm, and what eventually emerged was that over the course of a 10-year period, he'd stolen about $120,000, but it had been in quite even dribs and drabs, and so we didn't notice it growing up. In retrospect, it's what paid to go to the restaurant when we had that. But we had 2 old cars, and we didn't. There was nothing flashy about our life. But Dad, tragically, had got himself into a situation where this was how he thought he'd keep his family together. But no, it was complete shock to us and to my mother especially, and devastating for the law firm that he worked for. Awful situation.
Have you talked about it with him and the motivation and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, he's passed away now. He passed away 12 or so years ago, and I did talk to him about it. It was tough. I loved him. He was my father, but I never really forgave him, to be frank. It was such a stupid thing to do. The motivation was around his desire to keep his family together and to, he was in essence buying our love to an extent, and that's a dreadful thing to even say. But it was, his psychology at the time was that that's what he needed to do.
And you can see how when you've got the family at the centre of it, you can start to
and it's a real downward spiral. And like I say, he wasn't gambling, he wasn't spending lavishly or extravagantly. He'd just created a thing in his mind where I think he felt he needed to do this. There'll be a lot of other deep-seated kind of things, I'm sure, that lay behind it. But it was terribly hurtful to so many people, both those who he worked with and his family. And we talked about it a bit. He was able to rebuild his life somewhat after he was in prison and got a new partner and was able to live an okay life. And like I say, he's my father. I loved him. But it was a devastating thing for our family.
How do you think it, did it affect your attitudes to money? Coming back to what we're, talking about today.
Well, it was all about money, wasn't it? But
because as having an accountant for a father, that sort of alludes to sort of that carefulness with money. You grow up with a sense of knowing what it's worth and all that sort of stuff. But
we did. That was the thing. And then all of a sudden this happened. It had a very immediate consequence in terms of money, in the sense that I'd just left home and I was in my early years at university, and all of a sudden there was no backstop family backstop at all.
Yeah.
And I have this very vivid memory of going into the University Registry building in Dunedin to get a student allowance, which I hadn't been eligible for because of the fact that he had earned. And they asked me for proof, and the only proof I could find was the newspaper clipping of him being sentenced. Yeah. And so, I went from having that backstop of a family when I was doing my job at the supermarket, etc., to really being extremely tight from a money perspective. Far worse for my mother. I mean, my mother went from a situation where by that stage, she was actually at university, and she went from having this to having absolutely nothing at all, and she ended up going out to work and so on. And so, it certainly brought home to me what it is to find that sudden shock, whatever the cause of that shock might be in your life, and how it means that money can become quite consuming. And I think that would be the other thing I'd say about my relationship with money, is it has made me very aware of the fragility of a situation. And in my case, the shock came from Dad doing something terrible. For other people, it might just be an illness or an accident or whatever. And money plays such a big role in the way we live our lives that in an instant you can be changed.
And I guess, looking at whole nations, external shocks, a pandemic comes along and turns everything on its head. I'll come back to that, because just, university, obviously something clicked in for you. You enjoyed it. You stayed a while.
Not too long.
Not too long, but you found a sense of place at university?
Yeah, I think I did. I think that's a fair comment. I arrived in 1990. It was the first year that students had to pay upfront fees. In 1989, it cost $125 to enrol at Otago University. That was the Student Association fee. In 1990, when I arrived, it was $1,250. And so there was a pretty immediate recognition for me that growing up in South Dunedin, seeing people were in really tough circumstances, and then seeing their opportunities at education equal way. And bear in mind, no loan scheme. There was an allowance scheme, but it was not hugely generous.
Were you cross with Phil Goff?
Oh yeah,
because I was the same age, and I was cross with Phil Goff. I was very cross with
Phil Goff. In fact, my very first protest action was to march down, as a seventh former, to march down the main street of Dunedin shouting a 3-word slogan that ended with "off golf." And I'll let you insert the first word. You probably said it, Liam, yourself.
But then it got tougher and tougher, didn't it? There was the
it did, because Lockwood Smith promised. People who were around at the time will remember this. He signed a pledge in the 1990 election that National would reverse the fees. They didn't. They made it worse. They went to a new funding system that put the universities and the polytechs in the position of having to set the fees, but on a reduced funding basis. And so fees just grew astronomically through the 90s. And then allowances were cut, but the loan scheme was introduced. But the loan scheme was introduced with an interest rate. And so at one point, I think in the first year that I'd borrowed from the loan scheme, it was a 9% interest rate while you were studying. So we were all accruing these enormous debts that were just growing with no way of us paying them off. So all of that year contributed to me getting heavily involved in student politics, and I ended up being the president of the Student Association down in Dunedin, and then eventually for the New Zealand University Student Association.
How about the actual studying side? You did political science, but did you encounter economics on the way through there? I mean, was there sort of the Keynes versus Friedman stuff going on? Yeah, I mean,
economics is always a part of when you're studying politics. They're inextricably linked, and I certainly knew about Keynesianism. I was interested in different philosophical ways of managing politics and the economy and society. So those were there. I didn't study economics at university, but it was always around and was a really important part of our discussions. And I was talking about this to someone the other day. I don't think we called it neoliberalism at the time, but I was really aware of Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Rogernomics, and then that flowing through. And without, I was learning obviously as a university, but without a deep philosophical basis, we did look to Keynes and others to say, well, what are the other ways that this could happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite, looking at it now, looking at how New Zealanders react to inflation and all that stuff right now, I feel like that era through the 80s and early 90s has been a huge influence on the Kiwi mindset around this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I've seen you write about this before and include me in your writing about it. And I think that's absolutely true. You know, the 80s and the 90s were such a scarring time. I have a theory about New Zealand politics, a couple of them, but one of those theories is that everything in New Zealand politics eventually comes back to Rob Muldoon. And that's what happened in the 80s when New Zealand got itself in a position where as a country we were basically flat broke. And so what that meant was that incoming Labour government in 1984, which I vividly remember being elected, was faced with these extraordinary fiscal and economic problems, and many of the things they did they had to do, but then of course Roger had another plan which he was executing which went much further, and then David Lange responded to that, and then everything follows from there.
Where do you see just broadly that tension in the Labour Party? I mean, critics and commenters and talkback, you'll hear cries of socialism and things, but my observation of the modern Labour Party is that it's certainly still tethered to the fundamentals of a market economy. So where do you see it?
It's a social democratic party, the Labour Party, and that social democratic tradition acknowledges obviously the role of the market. That's part of it, but it also acknowledges the role of the state, particularly where there's market failure, where we do need to improve equity, where we should drive towards equity, and play the state playing an enabling role. I think that there isn't a great internal dispute in the Labour Party about that vision anymore. I think COVID's shown us that the state has got an absolutely critical role when a crisis comes along, but it's equally got a critical role in being an enabler of innovation and a supporter of that. And, you know, people like Mariana Mazzucato and the work that she's done around the mission economy and those sorts of concepts, that to me is a social democratic party in a modern world, the state playing that enabling and innovating role as well as the protecting and supporting role. So I think that's a social democratic tradition. But you're absolutely right. On any given announcement, I'll be attacked from further to my left on not having gone far enough, and on the right on being on the path to socialism. That probably points us to the fact that we're in about the right place.
Yeah. I mean, is it dynamic? Are you reading Thomas Piketty or Thomas Piketty, as Chloe Corbett corrected?
I'm sorry, I stand corrected as well. I have, and I think there are some clear lessons that what the neoliberal project has delivered to us at high levels of inequality and inequity, and so we have a job to do to turn that around. My view remains, though, that the mixed economy is the economy that will deliver that. The state can't deliver that on its own. The private sector can't deliver that on its own. We have to do it together. In New Zealand, we've got some really interesting elements of that perhaps other countries don't. The iwi economy, the place of Māori, the huge disadvantage Māori have had over a long period of time, but the enormous opportunity that exists now that we're going through the treaty settlement process. So I think we've kind of got our own version of that we can be developing as well.
Sure. How about at a more individual level, just in the sense that, I guess the question I sometimes ask is why do you think some people are rich and some people are poor? Why do some people make it out and the right will endlessly, and it plays to a kind of a common sense thing in people's brains that it's the bootstraps, pick yourself up and get on with it sort of mentality. I mean, what do you feel about that in relation to the sort of the broader outlook for economics and politics? Yeah,
look, I mean, so I'll maybe take it back to me as a person. Like I grew up as I said, in a Presbyterian family, and my mother kind of had sort of three things that she'd often talk to us about, which is that we are our brother and sister's keeper, that we've got a job to be able to do that we are all created equal, and if we work hard, we'll do well. And so for me, it's a little bit of, there's that Calvinistic work ethic there that you do need to work hard and you should work hard. And when you do, you'll do well. But you'll only do that based on those first two principles. You'll only do that if everyone's given a fair chance based on the idea that we are all created equal, and coming back to the man in the corner shop, we can say that, but actually we aren't necessarily born into that.
Yeah.
And so I have a great deal of difficulty with people who say that thing about the bootstraps, but then pull the ladder up behind them.
Yeah.
And so I don't believe that it is all just down to individual effort. Individual effort will significantly help your prospects, but in order to get to the place where that is true, we have a collective obligation as a society to give everyone a fair shot, and people don't get a fair shot if we just leave it to the market.
Okay, I guess this leads into a question which is probably a little bit weird to ask you, but I like to ask people how they would fix poverty or inequality if they had all the power. Now, I guess that's right, because you don't have all the power. There might be all sorts of different policies if you were running a Grant Robertson dictatorship.
Oh yeah, let's not go there. And I think we're doing a lot of, as you say, it's a tiny bit weird to ask me, because we are doing a lot of the things that are there. There are areas where I suspect I would agree with people on different parts of the political spectrum. Education is a massive part of this, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to fulfill their potential and get the skills and develop the knowledge that they need to succeed. Equally, the very, very basics of growing up in a warm, dry, safe home are so critical. And, we face a huge challenge in that area in New Zealand. But again, we won't solve poverty without solving housing and also the safety aspect of that, which is growing up in a home free of violence as well. These are the things, the root causes of poverty that we have to be able to drive into. And, we've spent a lot of time as a government doing that. One of the things I think it's a bit unheralded, actually, was in the first 100 days getting that legislation in place for the Child Poverty Act, which means that we have to report on it. So at budget time every year, I have to say this is what we've done against the before housing cost indicator, the after housing cost, the material deprivation indicators. So we're now having a conversation about that and realising that solving it is multi-dimensional.
Yeah, that's tough, because it means you've got a benchmark there. You have COVID, you have inflation hit, and there's going to be people whose purchasing power's gone backwards.
Absolutely, and we can look at it across the time we've been in government and say 66,000 kids have been lifted out of poverty, which is a great achievement, but then there are still kids in that situation. And, those material deprivation indicators are things like, are you eating 3 meals a day? Do you have a second pair of shoes? So we're really drilling down now into that. And so solving, to answer your question, it's a multi-dimensional and it is a long-term thing. And some of it's very practical. Some of it is simply about income. Yeah. And so that's why over the course of the last 3 budgets anyway, we've lifted benefits. It is about making sure that people have the basic income they need, but then also reaching into those longer-term causes.
I guess there's, one way or the other, you come into power, you're there for 3, 6, 9, 12 years if you're Keith Holyoake. There must be things that you think about in terms of the legacy, like the things that you want to leave this country, beyond the time that you're actually in power.
Absolutely, and the Prime Minister, she said her motivating reason for getting into politics was to make New Zealand the best country in the world to be a child, and I share a lot of that for the reasons that we've mentioned. I do want one of our legacies to be that we lift the incomes of the lowest incomes New Zealanders. And when I stood up and gave the budget in 2021, I did introduce it by going back to the mother of all budgets from 1991, and being 30 years on from that and realising that when we lifted benefits, we'd finally got every benefit back to the value that it had been at relatively in 1991. I want our legacy to be that we lift the incomes and the opportunities of all New Zealanders. I think that, as I said before, is multidimensional. But then more recently, I look at a project like social unemployment insurance, the New Zealand Income Insurance Scheme. I regard that as a not personal legacy, but a legacy building project for the government, because it's about economic security. It's about saying that as a government, we're going to create a social security network. I don't know so much a net, but social security network that means that people can achieve their potential. So I look at those legacy things. The PM's got child poverty, and I support that, but I think part of my job as finance minister is creating a broader set of things that provide economic security.
Sure. Just to finish up, really, back on your own money habits, I guess. Are you pretty good with money in terms of managing yourself?
I think I have to say that, though. Don't be terrible. Think of them as front and said, no, not really.
Well,
Look, I'm pretty good, I reckon. I wouldn't say I'm perfect.
Rob Fife told me he was terrible with money.
Yes.
And he ran an airline.
Yeah, he ran an airline.
He had people that did things.
Well, that was what I was about to say, is that the good news is that I've got the New Zealand Treasury, where there's about 400 odd people who work very hard to make sure the money is being spent well. We've got the Reserve Bank, where there's another large group of people who make sure that the banking system works. So the great news about being Minister of Finance is that your own personal financial habits don't guide what we do. I've tried to save money over the years. My partner and I are fortunate. We own a home, so we've got that kind of base. But I have to say, it's not a big driver for me.
No.
We're comfortably off, and I'm aware of the importance of saving, and I do that. But it's also not the big driver for me. Yeah, I mean that's something that I hear from a lot of people I interview. But I sort of assumed that doing your job that you're probably not driven by the paycheck. Well, yeah. I mean, again, we're well paid as politicians, but we also work extremely hard as well. But the motivation isn't the pay. You're right. The motivation is what we can do for New Zealand. Well, we'll leave it there, Grant. Thanks for that. It's great to have a chat, and good luck with beating inflation and and all those little things.
All those things that we'll be talking about again next week. Cheers, Liam. Cheers. Good one. And thank you for listening. If you've got feedback, drop me a line, liam.dann@nzherald.co.nz. And if you want to hear more of these, please subscribe at iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts.